So thank you very much. I think I want to start out with a statement about where I feel we are at the moment in the industry. Digital marketing, in my mind, it's fluid, it's developing fast, it's likely to take us places we never envisaged before. And I wonder how many of you in the room remember the film Minority Report with Tom Cruise? Anyone seen it? Okay, there's this really grasping scene where he's walking around, he's on the run, and he's trying to avoid the authorities, and he walks into this shop, and everywhere he goes, a little hologram that says, "Welcome, Tom, you should buy this jacket, this fits your size," whatever. And it may be that down the line, we're looking at marketing where brand literature is holograms presented to patients who are linked to the internet, and all those health records are joined together, who says, "Welcome to your health centre. Today, don't forget to tell your doctor this, that and the other, and have you taken this product?" Marketing by hologram, it may come. When it does, and while I'm long dead, remember me. But if not in this world, it may be possible in something like the second world, which is far less regulated than this first one. So I believe we're in the midst of a shift to a patient-centred industry. I know that phrase is overused, patient-centred, we always think about the patient first. But what I mean is a shift from who our customers are. The HCPs are there, but we are thinking more about the patients themselves. That doesn't mean we're communicating directly, but we're thinking about them. E-tools are here, more seem to be coming every day. And I'm excited by what the industry is doing and the potential for quality communications in that scenario. And I think that e-marketing in that scenario should be enhanced, it should be empowered and not shackled by compliance. And that's my stance for today. I don't have all the answers, but I'm going to share with you some practical approaches and some advice that I've given to brand teams. And they're cannibalized brand teams because you can't really come up and expose what particular brand teams have done. But it's based on my experience. So we're going to take this mock-up of an acne cream called Clearer Skin. And I'm going to start with a simple example, which is an over-the-counter product. So some lucky brand team was given this tacked on to their remit, that they had to actually, even though it was an old established product, it wasn't under prescription, but they had to make it increase the sales. So no prescription was needed, but the pharmacist was there to give advice. And the scenario that I had was they had already been doing for decades sponsored advice, they'd have acne information leaflets, and they'd ask the pharmacist for advice, and that's the pharmacist, quite a high role. Then they moved to a decision tree based in leaflets saying, "What's wrong with your skin? Aha, you have acne, and the Clearer Skin may help. Ask your pharmacist." The pharmacist has a slightly lesser role. And then they had this idea. The Spotter Pharmacy got in partnership with the pharmaceutical company and said, "We're trying to have quiet booths, quiet areas so people can consult us in the pharmacy. Can you help us?" And they went into partnership. And the pharma company supplied the electronic information booths. And together they revised the Q&A, the decision tree that would come up, press button A if you think you've got this, that and the other. But each time that they go in the booth, the pharmacist's role got less and less because the incentive for the patient or the member of the public to go and ask questions got less. And where I was asked to get involved was the latest piece of marketing. So Spotter Pharmacy decided the booths were old-fashioned, and most people, young people, who tend to be the main sufferers from acne, use the internet. The web-based decision tree, steering potential customers towards Clearer Skin, was now going to be completely separate from the pharmacist. You could do it at home. You couldn't just say, "I want to ask a question." And so they were looking for things like what FAQs should be available on that internet site, and could you email a question? And you could even you could jump out to the Clearer Skin website itself. So the compliance input that was key for there was this. The first thing we had talked about, or I got the brand team to talk about, was who monitors for adverse events and who's going to document it, or how you document that. So it was quite easily, and I agree with one of the things that I know Heather says quite a few times, which is that just because we're in the world of E, the mindset, the issues are the same, and we can transfer the knowledge that we know about working in the material world to the electronic world. It would have been the pharmacist who have heard about an adverse event or an SAE from discussion with the individual previously, and so you would have had a duty to report it. So you just need to confirm that in this new scenario it's the same, and document that you think it's the same. But what that would mean is that the setup would have to mean that emails went to Spotter Pharmacy, not to members of the pharma company. And on that same vein, they discussed, should we have a Twitter to support this? And after discussion, we decided no. The reason being, this is a well-established product. The people who use it were not going to change much, and the number of adverse events that were going to come via Twitter would be few because it's such an established product. But the effort to monitor all the Twitter communications to potentially respond to that would be too great, and it was deemed not worth doing. Sorry, I'll go back. How do I go backwards? I shouldn't have done that. Could you take one back, please? Okay. The other issue was records management. So where do those emails go with the questions? Where do the answers go? Was Spotter Pharmacy going to keep them? What interest did the pharmaceutical company have in what Spotter Pharmacy did with that information? It was, after all, information about their product. How long would those data be held? And who triggers deletion if deletion was actually agreed? Was it really deleted or just unlinked? So the pharma company had a responsibility to really look into that and to make sure that Spotter Pharmacy was going to be doing that. Also, the other issue that we sat and discussed was the end game. Questions may be asked that could be useful for market analysis and insights. If this wasn't built into what's going to happen at the beginning, then it was going to be loads of useful information that could not be used because permission wasn't given for that analysis. The brand team may have found that things they thought were really obvious, the tagline on the tube, why did people misunderstand it? And they would never find out about that if they couldn't look at or analyse the accumulated congregated data that was available. The other thing was, age was taken into the assessment. So when on the website you'd say what age you were, because the decision or the recommendation that this might be a product for you could be dependent on age. But if you're taking their age and then you're using that for marketing, then that's an improper use of those data. And so all those things came into the compliance discussion. Did we get permission from that? My next example is a prescription product. There was a piece of a CV, cardiovascular assessment software, that was being written. The patient benefits were quite clear. They had the ethical hat on. They had thought about the benefits. But people don't do things, pharma don't do this for nothing. The idea was, hopefully, pharma would get the same share but of a larger pie because more prescriptions would have been made or maybe made earlier. So the brand plan was, their cardiovascular medicine was a player in one of the areas where the government had set targets to reduce heart disease. There was money attached to meeting the targets for the practices. The clinics and HCP leads could make a name for themselves, and they would even get free development training as part of their ongoing training requirements. So the idea of doing this was, can we supply some patient interaction analysis to help the HCPs diagnose more accurately and consistently across their practice? To do that, the software that the pharmaceutical company were proposing needed to assess the current HCP appraisal, how they conducted themselves in front of the patients. Obviously, that meant they needed a third party because all the data had to be at arm's length, and they would analyse the data so that the HCPs could look back and say, oh, we could improve here, we could do that differently, whatever. So the aim was an increased prescribing that was appropriate. What was the input from compliance and the discussion that we had? I think first it came under the relationship. A capability assessment of HCPs? Really? What would you do if they were deemed incapable or they didn't pass the test you'd given them? Sack them? What would happen to them from an HR perspective? And think right through what the objectives of what you're trying to do was crucially important at that point. And after a little bit of sensible discussion, it became a confidence testing software rather than competence. Very important difference. It's far more palatable. The second thing about the patient data, okay, you've got a third party, but you really had to think about the data privacy quality of their setup. Who is the data controller going to be? Because those data are being kept separately. What would happen if there was some sort of breach? You've got to actually get the recommendations and agreement there. So you really have to scrutinise the data privacy issues with that third party. And in the instance that I was involved in, it was important that somebody in that company was a Caldecott Guardian, which is a NHS-specific medic appointed to look at patient data privacy. The other thing was, with the new Bribery Act in the UK, it's important that you put these jobs out to tender. So you can't always use the same old companies that you've used before. There has to be transparency about what you want and what you're tendering for. And being transparent about what you want it's difficult because you don't want to be obvious on the websites and things where you're putting it out exactly what your plan is because it's commercially interesting, but you have to be sure that people have been given a proper opportunity to apply. Then you had the end game. It was really, really important to make those people in that brand team to start at the beginning and think right through where it was going to take them. So it started as a service to medicine. It was free, it was just for patient benefit. But what they were doing was eminently saleable. It was something that was really going to be of use to PCTs, to clinics. And they wanted to sell it. So the issue that I talked them through was that when it's a service to medicine, it's free, the approach must be that all the practices that fell within the government's target areas for deprivation index, for the levels of chronic heart disease or whatever the criteria were that the government was saying, here's where we want to make a difference, all of them had to have it as a service to medicine, all of them had to have it free. Only then, where areas were doing okay on the heart disease and may want to improve, was it possible to think about selling them that product. But we had these things happening in parallel, and it was really, really important to document what you were doing, why you were doing it, what the rationale was, and what your limits were going to be. The third stage was going to be a totally commercial product, and it wouldn't be the brand team necessarily that did it, it would be a commercial team. So if you look back at that, there's a shift between marketeers saying, here's something as a service to medicine that might want to help you, to here's something you might want to buy. And so from a compliance perspective, it was really important to clarify whether their role was marketing or whether it was commercial. And it actually meant taking some people off as marketeers and separating them out for that brand, so that when they were speaking with HCPs, they knew exactly which hat they had on and what they were doing, and everybody, it was totally transparent. So my third example, before we take some questions, is Stab It In. It was the patient support program. There was a newly delivered mechanism, an injection mechanism for an established product. The license required that there must be patient support, so they had to have training on how to self-inject, and the nursing provider must be a third party to do that. There was an opportunity, however, to build a support program to help the patients to keep to their regimen. Reminders were going to be part of that support program, reminders to inject or to collect their prescription in time for the injection. It was a weekly injection, or over a period of weeks. There were going to be information leaflets on a website to support their understanding, to help them remind them how they're going to do those injections. And there was a sharps collection service offered for people who'd never had to inject before and didn't know what to do with their needles. So nurses were going to train the patients, those new to self-injecting. But obviously some of the patients might have self-injected for other products before and wouldn't need that training. So the Stab It team wanted also to make sure those people signed up to the support program, so all the patients would be in that program. Also, the nurse training of the individual patient was only going to be 2 or 3 visits, depending on how quickly they got comfortable with it. And so it was quite finite in that sense. But the support program that the company wanted to do was much longer than that. The reminders might be much more extended than that, of getting their prescription. And those reminders could be by email or they could be by text. That was the plan. There was going to be a call centre as well to say, I have a problem, what can you do? But the call centre piece came in because we had to ensure that all patients, not just those who were comfortable with the internet or had a mobile phone, could access it. Even though it was an e-marketing piece, you had to place in the fact that not everyone does it that way. The other plan was to send those individuals, once they'd signed up to the programme, leaflets and newsletters to keep them up to date with what's going on, so they would continue to use the product. There was also, crucially, going to be a welcome pack when they signed into the programme. And in that welcome pack was a cool pack to use when they collect their prescription to keep it at the right temperature. So here were the compliance input that we had on this programme. The contact routes. It was the nurse who was going to see the patient. It was the nurse, therefore, who had to get them signed up to the programme. It was absolutely crucial that that nurse did not put on pressure to join that programme. So the amount of training that the pharma company had to do for this third-party nursing company was much greater, but it was absolutely key. They also had to have good knowledge of what the programme offered and of the data privacy issues around people joining that programme. The other thing was the cool pack. So when I asked the team, well, if the patient needs a cool pack, but they only get it when they sign the patient support programme, isn't that a bit off? They either need the cool pack or they don't need the cool pack. And if you're only giving it to patients who sign the programme, then you obviously don't need it. So that cool pack had to come out of the patient support programme and be something that was offered to patients when they were prescribed this particular product. On the patient data piece, it was really crucial that the third party, again, was very savvy about data privacy. It was a European-wide project, and we had to decide who was going to be the data controller across about 15 different European countries. In the end, it was the UK that became the data controller, and because the data happened to be held there. But at one point, the third party was going to hold the data in a cloud computing environment and couldn't specify which country the data was going to be floating over any one day. The whole point of cloud computing is that it moves, it goes to the most effectively and most economic environment, and the whole issues about how you know what jurisdiction the data is when true cloud computing is in place was something that came on the table, and in the end it had to be a hard data centre. Then I think things have moved on, and it'll be interesting what happens on cloud computing, but it was an issue then, and it was a hard stored data centre. That data centre also had to manage the call centre because all the data had to get into the same place. I think the other thing there was that testing that third party, we asked them, okay, when people sign up to this programme, they're going to give their date of birth because it's important to know they were over 18. Why are you asking for their date of birth? Don't you just have a box that says, I'm over 18, yes or no? And they didn't want to change that because isn't it useful to know what age group of people you've got? You can do marketing around that, but we didn't let them have it because it wasn't required to be part of the patient support programme. It was just to make sure they were over 18. So crucially, looking at the data protection, the message that was in the leaflets that went out to them, that the nurses would have to give to them to let them think about joining the programme was vital. In that message, in that data privacy message in the handout to the patient, it said, we will delete your data. It didn't say when they were going to delete it. The implication was when it was no longer needed. But when we tested the company to say, show us how you delete it, they couldn't. They just delinked it. So you couldn't say in your bump that you were going to delete it. You either deleted it or you didn't. And if you can't do that, we had to say it was made completely inaccessible. But equally, nobody was quite sure when they were going to delete the data. If somebody opted out of the programme, was it instantly deleted? What if they wanted some of the bits and not others? I think it's really, really important to look right through it. The other piece is that some of the patients, you could say, well, I'm new to this, I'd like that Sharps collection, I'd like the little yellow bin in my kitchen that gets collected once every 2 weeks, but I don't want your leaflets, and I don't want your reminders. But when they signed into the programme, they got all or nothing. And you had to think about, once you start supplying somebody with Sharps, and then say, well, the programme's come to the finish, it's a well-established product now, the support is no longer needed, we're taking your bin away. In some of the rural countries more rural health service provision, it couldn't be walked back out of. People got used to it, and a long-term expense was committed to there to say we are going to support vehicles around the country to get those Sharps bins collected and to you. So I think what I'm trying to draw out to you is 3 compliance themes, and maybe not the most obvious ones, because compliance input to brand teams is greater than the FPA code or the national codes interpreting it or implementing it. It also includes freedom of information, data privacy, electronic communications legislation, the UK Bribery Act. So in terms of the themes, I think it's responsibilities. The company, or the third party, document your decisions, think through what you've done, clear objectives and document why you're doing it. Monitor that they work and adjust and be able to defend what you've done. The data privacy issues, which I've explained earlier. and records management, including deletion. And think hard. Once a program's finished, once an event's happened, how do you delete data from a Facebook site or an event that you might be hosting? Deleting my own Facebook account, I'm still 8 months into the process of trying to get one down that I don't want anymore for a different purpose. It's not easy. What's the retention schedule for tweets? There isn't one. How can you impose one on when your campaign's finished and you've used Twitter? If a third party uses cloud, what restriction is it under? And the end game again. Think through where the program might lead. There are going to be bright ideas from that brand team when you're a third of the way in. Oh, we ought to do this now. It's not excellent. But if you haven't thought of it at the beginning, you're probably stymied by the rules that you have set around it. And so in summary, think it through, have a clear objective, define the limits of what you're responsible for and what you are going to do, and the rationale for doing that. Pilot it if you need to. If you're going to pilot it, have a waiver to the relevant SOP and then fold it back in when it's been proven. So you document the rationale, you monitor it to defend it, and to end it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jean. Any questions from the audience? None? It was crystal clear.
At least I think you should hope that being a compliance person is actually interesting.
So let me put a question to the audience then. If you hear this story and you look at your own brand programs that you develop, how early do you as brand teams, when you're developing, involve your compliance in your development program?
From the beginning, yes. When we are defining the program, we involve regulatory.
From day one?
From day zero.
From day zero?
Yes. That was an easy one.
Can I respond to that? Which is, if
yes,
you go
please.
back to Nick's presentation, if you go day one with a blank sheet, then it's very hard to talk through people to come with their ethical views already thought through. I'm saying start really, really early. But so I've had people coming to sit down in my office and say, we want to do this. And it's just so amorphous that you're not even sure where it's going to end. So sometimes it's good to have like a skeleton to say, we think this. And then you can put your head around it saying, I can see them getting very enthused about that and go shooting off here. But sometimes with the blank, going in the blank sheet, it's almost like, oh, well, we've had compliance there from the start, so it must be okay. Sometimes it's quite hard to know where it's going, and sometimes a proposal really does help.
But does it go for most of you? Is that indeed from day one you involve your compliance?
Or is there maybe a company or a person who forgot to do that, or just in the final stage and screwed up? Who wants to say something about screwing up? No? Because
yes, there is one.
Yeah? Oh, there you are. Brave.
Well, what I've found is that it's also down to individual interpretation. We've had quite a few changes in our medical department, and that's been very frustrating because we thought we've got somewhere and then we have to go right back to the beginning, and something that should take sort of 6 months takes 2 years, and it's just really a comment, really. I just wondered if other people have found that.
So then it means that it took way longer than you had anticipated. And sorry?
Different people have different opinions on how to interpret what can and can't be done, and just when you think you've resolved that, then someone new comes and they're like, no, you can't do that, you've got to do it like this, and it's back to the drawing board.
Yeah, back to the drawing, and that costs money. Yeah. Anybody else wants to share maybe success stories then? If it is not a screwed up story, maybe a success story. Who has a success story saying, okay, we involved compliance in such an early process that it actually brought us something really good. Yeah, I think it's time for coffee.
Can I ask a question?
That is interesting.
Can I just ask if anybody has been thought through the issues of using cloud computing to store their data? Is anybody using it in one of their programs? No? Oh well. One job ahead.
Does that surprise you?
Yeah, It does. Because
What-
the claims are being made by companies delivering cloud computing, or internally to the company themselves doing cloud computing, is the infinite storage capacity. And they're talking about it's cheap, it's infinite, but nobody seems to me to be talking about, but you have to still manage it. It's not enough to say it's cheap enough to keep the data. You can't keep it if you shouldn't keep it. And that's not coming into the cloud computing marketing that I've seen, and maybe not in your companies.
And what about the discussion on cloud storage about ownership? Because if you work with partners, let's say in the value chain, who owns the data? Is it, if it is on party A, then no, the other party doesn't want to be involved because so you put it somewhere in the cloud. But how do you see that?
That's really important, because in terms of agreeing something to be deleted, it has to be the owners that will have the right to trigger it and to say it should be done, to confirm. And I think writing down in your contract, especially with partnerships or joint working, it could be that multiple companies, multiple partners have access to the data, all using it for different uses, but one company has to be the person that says we can own it. And that's a very difficult discussion, especially when people want to change the rules further down and do something different with it. It's key, you're right.
Some more questions? Well, on one hand, this gentleman here said, well, I involve compliance from day one. You say we've done it at a later stage, but that brought us into problems because it was a matter of interpretation from different persons. Now that in a certain case sounds a little bit like a contradiction. Compliance is, yeah, you can or you can't. How can it block your creativity, even though that it is open for different interpretations?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've got a very good relationship with our medical department, and we work really closely together, and I totally support the work that they do. But sometimes, I must admit, I think of an idea and I just think, I can't be bothered, because I know it's going to be too difficult, which I'm ashamed to say that, but I think that's the reality, and I'm sure more people in this room have thought that at one time or another.
Good. There's a question over there. Yeah.
Yeah, just a point actually. I know I presented this last year. I think you, both the chairs, will remember it, the ADHD campaign. And one element of that, there was a YouTube element, and one element of that that meant involving the medics earlier was just, sounds quite simple, but actually getting them to understand what YouTube was. I think they all knew what it was in terms of, they'd probably watch videos, watch their kids watch videos on it, but actually in terms of how the commenting policy worked, pre-moderation, post-moderation, actually just upload a funny video. It happened to be of me, and it probably wasn't that funny actually thinking about it, but it got the point across, and they were forwarding it around, writing comments. So involving them at a very early stage definitely helped, and then got us starting to think about what would a correct process be for commenting and getting that aligned to the rest of the strategy. So definitely for me, day one with the medics, and they should be certainly more supportive if you do that.
So there's also a matter of awareness and knowing what it is before you understand as compliance officers the risk and the benefits and things like that, right?
Yeah, I mean, obviously if there's any kind of knowledge gap, then the easiest and safest response is to say no and find a reason not to do it. So clearly, yeah, it's awareness and understanding that you want to create.
So they should be attending these kind of sessions as well, right?
Yeah, there's awareness from both sides. Obviously, you're keeping your medics aware, and clearly them aware coming to these sessions, surely.
Are there any compliance officers in the room here? Yes? Yeah? Oh, not. Oh, you have a question, right?
No, I'm a compliance officer.
Okay, so you're a compliance officer. So, okay, so you're the only one, or are there more?
Me.
Oh, yeah, of course. But so what is your view on that? So if you listen to this, and where are your colleagues?
Well, my colleague is sitting right next to me.
Yeah, but yeah.
Yeah, I think what works for us is when our teams come to us very early on in the project. We sit down, we discuss, and the thing is, the medics or the medical team should be solution-oriented, flexible, and understand what our marketeers want, right? And that makes a successful team. And situation with others that if there's a concept or an idea, they will come to us, talk to us, and we'll find a solution on how we can do it. So it's not just a blanket no. So we will do it, but within the ethics, within the compliance.
Yeah, okay. Okay.
I just say I absolutely agree with that. I think there's nearly always a way to do something. It's just making compliance supported and that you can find ways to do it.
So open up the dialogue, just start talking to each other
Absolutely.
and making understand.